Listen closely. I am your night guide. Imagine this. World War II could have ended before it truly began. Not with a battle, not with a bomb, but with ink. One neat signature, pressed in a quiet office, might have saved tens of millions of lives. One page could have bent the century, but instead of ink, the world spilled blood. That is the paradox that opens tonight. A war so vast it swallowed oceans, yet fragile enough, perhaps, to have been halted by a single, trembling hand. Now, soften your shoulders. Feel your pillow cradle your head. As you lie in your warm bed, maybe in Boston, Phoenix, Atlanta, picture a different street under your window. Imagine the hush of a European night, blackout curtains drawn, a sky without stars. Where your block is calm and familiar, their avenues were once laced with trenches, shelters, and anxious footsteps. Where crickets sing, sirens might have wailed. Where a neighbor's porch light glows, a single candle might have flickered against a basement wall, turning a child's face the color of honey and ash. Tonight, I'll share 30 astonishing truths about that war. The kind you didn't get in school books. The kind that hide in footnotes and forgotten letters. Some will startle you. A few may challenge what you thought you knew. But each will gently slow the rhythm of your mind. We'll move from thunder to whisper, from shock to calm, until history itself becomes a soft river carrying you toward sleep. You will hear of quiet courage, strange coincidences, inventions born of fear, and kindness that survived when almost nothing else did. So, close your eyes. Softly, slowly, let the room dim. It is the autumn of 1939. Paper maps rustle like leaves. Boots tap stone in distant streets. A train exhales into the cold. Somewhere, a clock chooses not to strike. Take a long, easy breath. We're crossing the threshold now, stepping into another night, the night of war. And we will walk through it together, gently, until the dark remembers how to become dawn. Let the room grow quiet. Let the edges of the day soften. I am your night guide, and I'll take you gently, step by slow step, into another time. Listen first. In the distance, a train breathes out of the dark, iron wheels rolling like thunder under a woolen sky. The rhythm is steady, comforting in its way, as if the tracks were a long, patient heartbeat. Boots tap stone, measured, echoing, a cadence that travels along cobblestone slick with evening mist. Far off, church bells speak in careful tones. Not a celebration, not quite an alarm, just a reminder that hours still pass, even when the world holds its breath. Breathe in and notice the air. It carries smoke from home hearths, a familiar human warmth that smells of bread crust and singed wood. There's a faint tang of metal too, the scent of rails and rivets and workshops, where someone wiped their hands on a rag dark with oil. And from the edge of town, a trace of fuel. Stores kept for trucks and planes. Sharp, solvent, the ghost of a future engine that hasn't yet woken. Feel the ground. It is cool and firm, a memory of stone that outlasts every headline. Your shoes brush grit. The street remembers hooves, bicycles, boot heels. Drift with me down a narrow lane. Laundry lines are empty now. The blackout made every window a closed eyelid. Curtains are drawn, thick and obedient, and the stars seem brighter for it, though they hide behind a rolling ceiling of cloud. Somewhere, a latch clicks. Somewhere a child whispers a question you can't quite hear, and a mother answers by smoothing a blanket, palm to brow, a lullaby made of touch. Close your eyes, softly, and let the bridge open. In your hand, there is no phone. Your thumb does not scroll, it rests. Paper meets your fingers instead, textured and faintly rough. The letter is folded twice. You lift a corner and smell the world that made it. Smoke and damp wool and the iron-dark trace of ink. The words lean forward, patient and uneven, written by a hand that paused to warm itself above a stove or a candle. For someone, this is a lifeline. For someone, this is the only conversation the night will allow. Now step with me into an underground room, the shelter. The air is cooler here and a little close. The benches are plain. The walls are chalk with dust. And when you press your palm to them, they share their chill without apology. A thermos lid clicks open. The steam carries tea and a memory of lemons. Coats are heavy, coarse wool that scratches, but warms. A sleeve brushes yours, and the world feels smaller, friendlier, even in the hush. Someone turns a page in a book with careful fingers so the paper won't tear. Someone else writes a name in the margin because names are anchors and anchors hold. Up above, a searchlight swivels, its pale blade feeling its way through cloud. The city is a careful animal, belly low to the ground. Traffic lights go dark. Lamps wear their hoods. Bicycles glide like swans over black water. Between buildings, a single lantern makes a golden egg on the snow. And in that egg, an old man locks his shop, the key teeth clicking home. He pauses, listens to the distant train, and allows himself one deep breath, as if oxygen alone could be courage. Hear the layered sounds again and let them settle. The trains rumble, steadier now, like a lullaby sung by steel. Boots far away, softer, as if the stone itself were cushioning the tempo. Bells, slower strikes, then silence, then the smallest echo. A dog shakes its coat. A bicycle bell rings once, shyly, and then thinks better of it. The city learns to speak in whispers. We drift to the countryside because night has room for both. The fields are a dark quilt stitched with hedges. A farmhouse breathes gently, smoke from a squat chimney, light under a door. Inside, the table holds bowls that remember warm soup. A coat dries on a peg. It smells of frost and wood smoke. On the sill, a sprig of rosemary dries and perfumes the air with something clean and green, a reminder that not everything in the world is iron and ash. Somebody has left a letter there too, ink glistening in the slant light from a lamp with a crooked shade. The pen paused, and a dot of ink made a star. Return to town with me for a moment. The tram sleeps on its rails like a docked boat. Posters curl at their corners. The pavement holds a faint map of footprints that will be gone by morning. In a courtyard, laundry sways without wind. The cloth too heavy with evening to move. Somewhere, a gramophone whispers a tune that climbs up a stairwell and sits on the windowsill like a cat. It lingers in the ear long after the needle lifts. Hold the letter again. Feel its edge against your skin. The crease where it was folded and unfolded, read and reread. The ink is dry, but shines under the lamp like a small river. This letter makes the past a room you can enter. It makes the distant warm. The words do not rush. They do not demand. They keep pace with your breath. And now, feel your own body in this darkness that is not quite ours and not quite theirs. Your shoulders loosen. Your jaw unclenches. The blankets of the shelter are scratchy, yes, but they are a proof of care, and your hands tuck them closer with grateful, sleepy motions. Your eyes grow heavy because the night is teaching you its grammar. Fewer exclamations, longer sentences, wide margins of quiet. Above ground, the searchlight completes its slow arc and rests. The lantern is pinched out. A curl of smoke writes an unreadable word in the air and fades. The train moves away, softer, softer, until it is a memory of rhythm instead of a sound. The bells keep their counsel. The boots are gone. What remains is breath, yours, steady and even, and the breath of a city that has decided, for this hour at least, to lie down. You are holding a letter, and in holding it, you are being held by time, by patience, by the ordinary courage of people who cooked soup and swept floors and learned to whisper. This is the bridge. On one side, the room where you rest. On the other, a night long ago that had its own warmth, its own hush, its own small lights. Stay with the quiet between them. In that quiet, history becomes a gentle tide, and if you listen closely, it will carry you onward, slowly and kindly, deeper into the story, deeper into sleep. Tonight we'll meet 4 people, not generals on balcony railings and not arrows on a map, but ordinary hands and ordinary breaths, lives small enough to fit into a letter, sturdy enough to hold a piece of the century. As you listen, keep your breathing slow and even. Let each story arrive like a tide, lift you, and set you down again. The cockpit is a narrow room of glass and frost. Gauges glow like obedient stars. Leather smells of oil and cold air. Beneath the wings, winter farmland folds and unfolds. Dark ridges, pale rivers, a quilt the color of iron. In his mouth, the pilot keeps a chip of peppermint to steady his stomach. In his chest, the engine's vibration becomes his own pulse. Steady, steady, steady. Then a new sound, thin and high. The sawtooth whine of enemy engines. The sky narrows. Tracers stitch orange lines through cloud. There is a moment, the kind that doesn't last a second, but feels like it asks for a lifetime, when the pilot measures his options and finds there aren't many. Ammunition, nearly gone. Altitude, falling. The town below, not a word on a map, but people, bread, windows. A woman beating a rug on a balcony. A boy running with a wooden sword. He sees them not with his eyes, but with a knowledge the night has taught him. Every dot on a chart is a kitchen, a pillow, a name. There is one last maneuver in the book that no one wants to read. Terran, the ramming, wings against metal, air against will. A desperate choice used more than once in that war, and sometimes, unbelievably, survived. He trims the plane, breathes out to make more room in his ribs, and points the nose not at the enemy so much as at the thin idea of stopping those bullets before they fall. Contact is a shudder that speaks through bone. Screws leap like sparks inside the instruments. The canopy web cracks. For an instant, the world becomes a single note. Then the note breaks, and so does the wing. Weightlessness. A brightness not of light, but of shock. He pulls the buckle, shoves the canopy, and the sky is suddenly a rushing room without walls. Canvas jerks open above him. Parachute, a pale flower. Then tears along one seam. He swings, lurches, drops, swings again, slower. Below, the quilt of fields rises like a careful hand. He lands hard, knees soft, teeth clamped. Mud accepts him. The air smells of snow and something sweet, like apples stored in a cellar. In the near distance, pieces of a plane sizzle in frost. He is alive. The village bell that moments ago would have been a target now sounds like a pulse outside his body. Slow, certain. He presses his palm to the ground and feels it cool and real. A woman runs across the field, skirt gathered. A boy follows, wooden sword under his arm. Someone offers a coat, another offers bread. The wind, heartless a moment ago, is only wind again. Quiet fact, In that war, several pilots performed aerial ramming to stop attackers. A number survived to tell the story. The textbooks keep the dates. Tonight we keep the breath that decided. Breathe in, slowly. Breathe out, slowly. Let the engines fade to a hum far away. Let the frost melt from the glass. Let the ground hold you steady. Now the sound of boots recedes, and we are inside a dim apartment whose wallpaper lifts at the corner like a leaf. The stove ticks as it cools. On the table, a loaf wrapped in a towel, a jug of water, and a stack of thin copybooks that smell faintly of dust and hope. The clock is careful. It chooses not to strike the hour. Outside, occupation posters lean on brick. Inside, a woman removes her coat and becomes a teacher. Her classroom appears as if by permission. 2 children from upstairs, 3 from the building over the courtyard, 1 from the bakery lane. Their hands red from cold, their eyes bright with the alertness of important secrecy. They slip through the door one by one, each greeted not with hello, but with a fingertip to the lips and a nod to the chairs. On the floor, chalk squeaks softly across a loose square of slate. On the window, a cloth hung double to keep the warmth in and the trouble out. She writes the date not on the top line, but under it, where it will be easy to tear away if someone knocks. The alphabet marches, quiet and proud, a small parade that risks everything. History, too, but told sideways, through stories of rivers and bridges and the names of poets, so no one can call it a syllabus. The children recite in whispers, a choir of moths. When fear tightens their throats, she switches to arithmetic, numbers that behave if you treat them gently. There are footsteps in the stairwell. The lesson collapses into the shape of a knitting circle. Needles appear. Yarn remembers the hands that used it yesterday and falls softly into loops. The footsteps pass. The teacher breathes again, slow and deep, as if practicing for a future where breathing is never counted. Then she reaches into her pocket and brings out a sheet of paper so thin it is nearly transparent. Tiny print, edges worn, the ink almost brown. A poem smuggled through 3 hands and a ham sandwich, copied at midnight with a pencil shaved to a toothpick. She reads, "The words have no uniforms and cannot be arrested. They plant themselves in the children the way bulbs go into winter soil. No promise asked, only time. Someone smiles without meaning to. Someone else sits taller. The stove ticks again. When the lesson ends, the children leave the way. Raindrops end, one by one, without a sound. The teacher gathers the copybooks, stacks the slates, and wipes the chalk with the sleeve she keeps for that purpose. She tucks the poem into a jar of flour, where officials never bother to look. She balls a scrap of paper in her fist, lights it, and sets it in a saucer. The flame eats handwriting without savor, and goes out with an innocent curl of smoke. Quiet fact: in occupied cities, clandestine schools, the secret classes met behind curtains and under floorboards so children could keep learning what was forbidden. Thousands of lessons were smuggled past fear in the pockets of ordinary people. Lay a hand on your chest. Feel the lesson there. Steady, steady. Learning as quiet defiance. Whisper as bridge. The sea is wider at night. On a small Pacific island, it presses against mangrove roots and coral, breathing in a slow, giant rhythm. Crickets weave thin silver threads through the air. Palm fronds clap softly as if applauding patience. In that careful darkness, a young intelligence officer listens for things the jungle might say. Footsteps that don't belong to animals. The tongue of a radio. The rumor of a boat. His uniform is sun-bleached. His orders are not. Leaflets drift down like pale birds. Surrender, they say. The war is over, they say. He studies the paper in the moonlight and finds the font wrong, the grammar suspect, the timing too convenient. A trap, he decides. His commander had said, "Hold your post. Do not give up. I will return with orders." And so he holds. Days happen. Weeks happen. The calendar, finding no nails, collapses into seasons. He learns the pathways of rain and the inventories of stars. He mends and mends again. The rifle, cleaned so often it feels like a prayer, becomes not a weapon, but a routine. Years lay down like leaves. The world reshapes itself elsewhere into televisions and highways, into songs his radio never hears. On the island, he watches the tide as if it were a clock that keeps the only honest time. Sometimes he sees other holdouts, and sometimes only the shadows of his own caution. He avoids fires, avoids open spaces, avoids stories that try to tell him he can stop. He eats what the jungle will give him and trusts only orders he has not yet received. One day, though day is only a name we give to light, another man steps into the glade with a voice the island cannot imitate. He speaks the old rank, the old greetings, and finally, the old specific words that only one officer could say to only one soldier. He unrolls a piece of paper that carries not a trick, not a lie, but the original command structure of another century. Permission, at last, to lay the rifle down. The officer, older now by nearly 3 decades, doesn't drop it. He places it, gently, on a woven mat of palm leaves, an altar for the end of an era. He bows to the island that kept him alive, and to the country that had already changed without him. When he boards a boat, the motor's sound seems wrong. Too fast, too loud, a thing from a dream he didn't choose. The shoreline thins to a dark pencil stroke, and then to a memory. When he reaches the city, he finds his reflection multiplied in windows he doesn't recognize. Cars dart like fish of polished steel. He tastes bread that has forgotten the jungle. He reads headlines that insist on a future and realizes the past cannot be carried, only honored. The war he refused to end respectfully steps aside. Quiet fact: a handful of soldiers on remote islands did not believe the war was over for years, and in one famous case, for nearly 3 decades, returning only when a superior officer delivered direct orders in person. In a world that had moved on, duty kept its own time. Let your shoulders soften as if a long watch has just ended. Inhale, exhale, release. Now we are in a kitchen somewhere in Ohio, or maybe Georgia, or Oregon, where evening is the friendly kind. The radio glows with a small, important light. Its voice has edges of brass and smoke. The table is a republic of crumbs. Toast crumbs, cookie crumbs, a fine dusting of pencil shavings. A boy sits with his elbows tucked in, because his mother says it's polite, and writes to a soldier whose name he learned at church, or from a neighbor, or from a list at the post office. "Dear Sir," he begins, then crosses out "Sir" and writes the name instead, carefully, a soldier who is now a person. He doesn't know what to say about war, so he draws a picture of the family dog, ears like sails. He writes about baseball scores, which are a language the world may understand, and about the snow that turned the mailbox into a sugar loaf. He includes a joke he heard at school and hopes it still works when it arrives, because the joke has to travel a long way. On the counter, an envelope with a special form waits. Victory mail. The kind that shrinks letters onto microfilm so thousands can ride in the belly of a single plane. He watches his mother glue the stamp and presses the paper flat with both hands. The way you pat a friend's shoulder, somewhere far away, the letter will become a tiny photograph, and then, later, a big letter again. Words that go small to stay strong. He writes every Wednesday after homework. He doesn't always get answers, but sometimes he does. A postcard with sunburnt handwriting, a fold that smells of dust and distant oranges, a line that says, "Your dog looks like the mascot at our camp." He learns to measure time by replies and to count victories not in territory, but in sentences. For his birthday, he asks for a book of stamps. For Christmas, he asks for encryption, just a simple code wheel from the back of a comic so he can hide "keep your head down" inside the pattern of his greeting. Once, there is a gap of weeks. The radio, with its brass voice, speaks of storms. The boy keeps writing anyway. He includes a leaf he varnished himself, which makes the envelope smell faintly of autumn forever. When a reply finally comes, it is brief and full of gratitude. An adult trying not to cry in ink. The boy reads it twice, then tucks it under his pillow. He sleeps as if guarding a treasure. When the soldier comes home, because sometimes that happened, there is a handshake on a porch, and the boy is taller than either of them expected. The soldier says the letters made the tent less cold. The boy says he never knew paper could do that. They do not speak about fear, because fear is already folding itself and putting itself away in a drawer, to be opened only when someone needs to remember how brave they were. Quiet fact: American families, children included, joined vast letter-writing efforts. V-mail turned long letters into tiny reels to save cargo space, then printed them back to full size at destination. Words traveled small, so encouragement could arrive big. Rest your hands like envelopes on the table of your breath. Feel the room warm with simple acts: writing a name, sealing a hope, trusting a stamp, and the sky. A gentle pause. Between lives, 4 people, 4 rooms of the same war. A cockpit haloed with frost. A kitchen that smells of toast and glue. A classroom behind a curtain. A jungle that kept its own calendar. Each story holds a small, astonishing truth, and each truth is quiet enough to carry you deeper rather than wake you. If your eyes wish to close, let them. If your mind wants to float, let it float the way a letter crosses an ocean, lightly, patiently, sure of its harbor. With your next breath, we'll cross into wider streets, into communities and cities, where hidden networks, unspoken rules, and unlikely solidarities shape the days. But for now, stay with the softness at the edges of these 4 rooms. The engines are far away. The boots are a memory. The bell has struck its last note and rests. You are safe, and the story is still with you, moving at the speed of sleep. Tonight, we step out of private rooms and into the shared spaces where lives overlap. Platforms and kitchens, stairwells and salons, workshops where metal remembers the touch of careful hands, and barracks where a melody tries, stubbornly and tenderly, to keep time. As you listen, let the pace slow. Let the city settle around you like a warm coat. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, quietly, evenly. We'll visit 4 places, and in each we'll listen for how a whole society learned to whisper, to signal, to endure. 1. London Underground. A city learns to sleep. Below the streets. Night in London begins with a dimming. Lamps hooded, windows curtained, streets growing careful. Then comes the descent. Families, neighbors, strangers with a neighborly look strangers get when the ground shakes. Down, down into the stations. Baker Street, Aldwych, Bethnal Green, names you could hum like a lullaby. The tiled walls shine with the sheen of many hands. The air is cooler, and a damp mineral scent rises from the rails, honest and old. On the platforms, life reassembles itself in miniature. Blankets unfurl like maps. Wooden boards become beds. Newspapers learn to be pillows. A woman in a blue sweater ties a string between two posts and drapes a cloth to make a tiny room where privacy can pretend to exist. Teapots arrive in baskets. Card games begin. A man produces a tin of biscuits and passes it as if he were showing a photograph of better days. Look, remember? Crunch and sugar and ordinary talk. Outside, the sirens draw white lines in the night. Inside, people adjust. Children invent new rules for old games. No running near the edge, points for the softest whisper. Mothers hum, not to drown out fear, but to braid it into something less sharp. On a wall, chalk marks record heights. Tommy, age 7. Not because anyone needs the measure, but because measuring says we are still growing. Putting a mark on tile says, this is our place for tonight. We belong to time. Occasionally the trains still run, a practical miracle, steel breathing through a temporary city. When a train passes, the wind it drags lifts hair and hope. People lift their feet to let the breeze sweep the dust from under their shoes, and the racket is almost comic, a clattering laugh that startles and then comforts. Then quiet returns, soft, densely woven, the kind of quiet that forms when many hearts agree to beat slowly together. Someone has brought a radio. Its voice finds corners to sit in, broadcast through a handkerchief draped over the speaker to keep it polite. News comes in spoonfuls, small enough to swallow. A pianist, there is always one, has managed to wheel a battered upright to the end of the platform. It's out of tune in a friendly way. She plays standards that remember peacetime, and with each chord, a station becomes, improbably, a parlor. Scarves loosen, shoulders sink. A few people try to harmonize under their breath and feel, just for a moment, free. The platform smells of soap and tea and the warm animal scent of humanity clustered safely. Wool, tobacco, oranges surrendered from a ration book. A baby, exhausted by the novelty, sleeps with its ear against a mother's chest. That ancient drum, still perfect. A boy, eyes wide, is appointed night watcher for his family's little square of floor. He takes to it with gleeful seriousness, already planning to tell his teacher how brave he was. Overhead, the city keeps house in the dangerous dark. Below, the city keeps heart. Morning returns like a promise kept. The crowd unthreads itself, blankets shaken, cups stacked, the piano reluctantly pushed aside. People climb the same stairs together, now carrying the same kind of quiet, the kind that says, we made it through, and also, we will be back. They step into sunlight and soot and the business of mending, but the underground lingers in their bones, the memory of an entire city breathing beneath itself in order to live. Quiet fact, for months and months, many Londoners slept in tube stations during the Blitz, building a shared nighttime world, part shelter, part street, part home, where music, tea, and small routines made safety out of stone and steel. Let your breath follow their rhythm, a long, slow inhale, like climbing, a deep, unhurried exhale, like settling onto the platform. Feel yourself held by the earth, supported by tile and time. 2. Paris. Hair as signal, street as stage. Now walk with me to Paris, where a whisper can become fashion, where the way you tie a scarf can be a sentence. The city at night still smells faintly of yeast from bakeries and of wet stone. Bicycles skim past with their lamps shaded. Cafes with pulled curtains practice the art of looking closed and feeling open. Inside, coffee tastes like courage stretched thin, bitter, grateful, beloved. In occupied streets, people learn to speak without names. A gesture, a color, a turn of the wrist could hold a paragraph. Hairstyles became a quiet language. Some women tucked tricolor ribbons where only the attentive would notice. Some shaped their hair into smooth waves or rolled crowns. Styles that traveled across the channel as victory rolls. A private salute in a public mirror. A tilt of a beret. A lock pinned just so. Signals glided through alleys and sat down at tables where nothing was written and everything was understood. The city kept its ledger of hurt and hope. There were days when betrayal moved with a swagger, days when kindness hid in plain sight. A baker who saved extra crusts, a seamstress who altered a uniform and stitched a message into the hem, a florist who delivered bouquets with hollow stems. The war pressed people into difficult shapes. Some bent toward survival in ways they regretted. Some stood against it and paid, and many hovered in the gray. And when liberation came, the streets exhaled, a long breath that had been held too long. What followed carried both relief and a reckoning. In public squares, crowds sometimes punished those accused of collaboration, and one visible ritual marked the charge, heads roughly shaved as a parade of shame. It was a violence that wore righteousness, and history, with its deep pockets, carries that discomfort still. Yet even as some heads were bared, other heads lifted. Women fashioned their hair deliberately, reclaiming their crowns as a daily ceremony. You could read a morning's mood along the boulevards. Scarves brighter, lipstick bolder, curls set with the care one gives to planting a flag. There were salons where the air smelled of soap and singed hair, where mirrors multiplied resolve. In those rooms, scissors and combs narrated a city's slow re-entry into its own story. A stylist, sleeves rolled, asked, "How short?" The client answered, "As long as it feels like me again." The conversation was about bangs and layers, but also about belonging, about returning to a self that the war had put in storage. Hair grows, that is its nature. And growing became a statement. Time had started up once more. Think of the codes embedded in fabric, seams where notes could hide, braids that concealed keys, hats with bands wide enough to carry documents tiny as an eyelash. Think of how many people met eyes in the mirror and practiced bravery by inches. I will walk to the market. I will nod at my neighbor. I will not forget who I am. The city, so expert at display, learned the gentler art of quiet signs. Quiet fact: in occupied and newly liberated Paris, appearance, hair, scarves, small adornments often served as subtle messaging, signs of allegiance, hope, or grief. In the aftermath, public shaming by head shaving of accused collaborators left images that still trouble memory, even as ordinary people reclaimed public space with styles that signaled rebuilding and dignity. Let your jaw unclench. Let your scalp soften, as if a comb moved through it slowly, kindly. Breathe out the tension. Breathe in the sense of a city fixing itself strand by strand. 3. Switzerland, the watchmakers of a neutral valley. The Jura valleys hold winter the way cupped hands hold water. Carefully, with respect. Snow makes a clean brightness on the slopes. Smoke rises in measured lines from chimneys. Church bells ring at their sensible intervals. Inside workshops, the world's smallest machinery waits for the day to begin. A watch is quiet until you wind it. Then it becomes a pocket-sized heartbeat. Neutrality is not stillness. It is motion without visible waves, commerce without banners, a calculus of survival that turns on discretion. In these towns, precision is the local weather. Benches are lined with felt. Loop lenses bloom like little moons. Tweezers lift screws so delicate they seem like punctuation shaken from a sentence. A dozen wrists lean over a dozen movements, and each movement holds the future in brass. Chronographs that will ride inside aircraft, timers that will spark fuses, compasses that will teach needles the trick of always pointing home. Orders arrive with polite vagueness, routed through brokers and front companies with names as careful as their letterheads. The radio in the corner, tuned low, offers a geography of tension. The ledger on the desk records only numbers. Outside, trains pass in both directions. Inside, the tick-tick-tick of test stands makes a soft rain of sound. The workers keep their hands steady and their questions close. In the valley, ethics cannot be shouted. They must be examined under a loop, gear by gear. The town adapts in other ways, too. Cafes develop a fluent bilingualism of caution. Hotel registers learn to spell the names of men who do not wish to be remembered. The post office develops a fondness for brown paper and string. On Sundays, people listen to sermons about conscience, about the quiet duties of bread and shelter, about how to be good neighbors in a time when goodness can look like silence. On weekdays, they pass packages wrapped so that even the seams seem modest. A watchmaker holds a balance spring up to the window. It looks like a tiny slinky, but it governs the truth of seconds. If you breathe on it, it trembles. If you touch it, it bends its philosophy around your fingerprint. He sets it into the escapement and feels the moment when static metal becomes a reliable river. Tick, tick, tick. He cannot control where this river flows. Not entirely. But he can decide, here, to make it accurate, to refuse sloppy time. He can sign his work with care and hope that care itself is a kind of mercy. Neutrality's gift is that some trucks pass through and don't stop. Neutrality's burden is that some of what passes cannot be blessed. Yet the valley's other exports matter too. Repair, patience, the belief that something assembled with love, no matter who wears it, will bear a residue of that love. It might be the dearest superstition we have. At night, the town is dark enough to know the constellations by their old names. A father holds a watch to his daughter's ear. Her eyes widen at the tiny animal inside, so well trained, so brave. He tells her that a day is made of many small true things. He does not say, but hopes that such true things make a life that will stand the test of history's weather. Quiet fact, while officially neutral, Swiss industry, including precision watchmaking, supplied instruments and components that ended up on both sides of the conflict. In the quiet rooms of the Jura, people worked with exquisite skill amid complex moral fog, trusting that careful craft might still be a form of good. Let your breath match a steady tick. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. Imagine a gear settling into place, a spring finding its rhythm, your own pulse choosing calm. 4. Music behind wire. Orchestras, where hope needed a baton. The fourth place is the most fragile. We enter with reverence and with the softest steps we know. Let the room around you be very gentle now. Ease your shoulders lower. Loosen the hands. There were camps where fences braided shadows onto the ground, where numbers tried to erase names, where winter made a sound like breaking thread. And in those hardest places, people made music. It was not a luxury. It was oxygen carefully divided. In a barracks that smelled of damp wood and disinfectant, someone cradled a violin patched with glue and faith. Somewhere else, a clarinet rested in a ragged case like a bird in a pocket. A conductor, sometimes a musician, sometimes simply the bravest listener, lifted a hand and found a downbeat in the air. They tuned to one another instead of to a piano they did not have, trusting the human ear to do what pitchforks could not. The first notes were always thin from hunger, but then they glowed with the warmth of being shared. What did they play? Whatever memory allowed. A folk song from a village whose church bells could be recalled by breath alone. A movement from a symphony, reconstructed by consensus. No, the line rises there, then it falls. Pages turning in minds rather than on stands. A lullaby learned from a grandmother whose hands smelled of flour. The repertoire was a rope thrown across a chasm, and each performance pulled people a little toward the side called human. Musicians swapped stories about reeds and strings like others traded recipes. How to boil this, how to coax that, how to make a broken bow, hold rosin enough for a second act. A tailor refashioned a collar so that a soloist could stand a little taller. A guard, yes, even this happened, lingered a minute longer at the door, caught by a melody that answered some early, softer version of himself. The music did not forgive. It remembered. But while it played, the air rearranged itself into something breathable. Audience members closed their eyes because vision was a thief in those places. Hearing, by contrast, gave more than it took. People swayed without moving, swam without water, prayed without words. Afterward, applause was a quiet shiver of hands, or a look that said, "You kept a part of me from breaking tonight." Instruments were wrapped carefully, like bread. We cannot pretend that music saved everyone. We cannot pretend it unmade the wire or the cruelty. But we can say, softly and with conviction, that music saved something inside many who heard it, something that might otherwise have remained unreachable. And later, after, the memory of those notes became a compass. It pointed not to escape, but to endurance, not to forgetting, but to the kind of remembering that lets sleep come without nightmares every time. Quiet fact: in several camps, including ghettos and transit camps, prisoners formed ensembles, sometimes officially sanctioned for propaganda, sometimes clandestine for the soul. They rehearsed under impossible conditions and performed for audiences whose hunger did not prevent them from hearing beauty. Place a hand over your heart. Feel the small orchestra there. Percussion, your pulse. Strings, your breath. Winds, the whisper the room makes when you exhale. Let the conductor inside you lower the tempo. Adagio now, even slower. The city after the song. We have visited a platform under London, a salon in Paris, a workshop in the Swiss mountains, and a barracks where a violin chose to speak. Together, they tell us how communities bend without breaking, how public life retools itself to carry gentleness like contraband. Notice the thread that runs through them, how people make rooms, literal and figurative, where it is safe to be human. A platform becomes a bedroom, a scarf becomes a sentence, a balance spring becomes a promise, a melody becomes a hand to hold. None of these are loud victories. All of them are victories. As you rest, let the images soften at the edges, the chalk mark on tile that says Tommy, Age 7. A mirror haloing a new curl that feels like reclamation. A watch's second hand stepping with modest authority. A bow poised for the next phrase. Let them drift and arrange themselves in a pattern your mind finds restful. Breathe in. Feel the shelter of shared spaces. Breathe out. Feel the mercy of small, true things. When you're ready, we will widen the lens once more, beyond families and streets, beyond salons and stations, into the long view of history, where these ripples meet and become currents. For now, stay where the city is quiet and kind, held together by tea and thread, by screws the size of freckles, by notes that refuse to vanish. The night has learned your rhythm, and you, in turn, have learned the night's. Now, we widen the lens. The rooms and streets we visited become patterns. The whispers become currents. What seemed like isolated acts, the letter, the haircut, the night spent on tile, were threads in a larger weave that kept fraying, then finding a way to hold. Breathe slowly. Let your chest rise like a tide and fall like a tide. We are going to look at how this war, so terrible up close, quietly rewired the world in ways that still hum beneath your pillow tonight. 1. Machines that listen to secrets. From code breakers to computers. Picture a long hall warmed by the friction of minds at work. It smells faintly of oil, paper, and damp wool. Punch tape loops hang like pale streamers. Teleprinters chatter their bright mechanical syllables. Outside, the grounds are ordinary, with hedges and cold air. Inside, language is taken apart and put back together until it confesses patterns it didn't know it held. Before there were computers, as we know them, there were computers. People with pencils and patience. Men and women who could keep more than one alphabet in their heads, who could feel in the fingertips of thought when a cipher had a loose thread. They stood at the edge of secrecy and tugged gently until the knot said, all right, and came undone. Code breaking didn't begin the war, and it couldn't end it alone. But it changed the tempo. The German Enigma machines, with their rotating alphabets, wanted to be invincible. The more complex Lorentz traffic wanted to be a locked room in a locked house. The response was part mathematics, part engineering, part awe. Racks of relays that clicked like rain. The electromechanical bomb that worried at keys the way a determined mind worries at a riddle. And then a new creature, tall and warm and full of valves, Colossus, reading patterns from paper tape at a speed the human eye could not love, but the human future would. Imagine the glow of vacuum tubes, the steady exhale of fans, the quiet certainty that bits, though the word wasn't common yet, could stand in for meaning, for choices, for yes and no. A new grammar was being born out of necessity. Logic gates and programs, the idea that instructions themselves are a kind of material you can shape. The work was secret and urgent, yet the result slipped free of its origin and grew into the everyday magic you are using now to hear this voice in the dark. We honor, too, the path that led to that hall. The mathematicians who had already charted parts of this territory, and the early breakthroughs, some made in Warsaw before the world tilted, quietly carried across borders in time to matter. We hold the names carefully because they weighed their gifts against danger and chose to give anyway. Quiet fact: the wartime assault on ciphers accelerated the birth of electronic computing. Machines like the bombs and Colossus were not general purpose in the modern sense, but they established the logic and the appetite for what would become computers. And many of the first programmers were the very people who had once been human computers. Let your breath imitate the steady pulse of a machine doing work it was built to love. In, out, in, out. A calm cadence, a patient loop, carrying you forward. 2. A new medicine finds its mass. Penicillin learns to feed the world. Now step into a different room, a laboratory that smells of yeast and metal, of warm sugar water and disinfectant. There is condensation on the insides of glass. There are flasks and pipes that hiss and quiet, like a creature at rest. On a bench sits a petri dish that once surprised a curious mind. That surprise, mold halos eating back a bacterial lawn, was a whisper long before war. The war taught the whisper to sing loudly, widely, in factories that never slept. Penicillin had been noticed years before by a man who saw what others had simply looked at. But noticing is not the same as having enough to help a wounded field. The problem was scale. How to coax a reluctant fungus to make medicine by the gallon, not the teaspoon. In the early 1940s, teams in white coats and rolled sleeves chased that problem across oceans. They tried vessels and temperatures, nutrients, and agitation, until one day the broth turned rich with promise. Someone discovered that a humble byproduct from corn made the mold generous. Someone else figured out how to keep oxygen in perfect conversation with the growing culture. The tanks grew taller. The pipes found the right curve. The liquid turned the color of a solution. On battlefields and in hospitals, the difference was not subtle. Wounds that once were invitations to fevers and funerals became injuries that could be cleaned, stitched, watched, and trusted to heal. Surgeons learned to listen for infection and to reach for a vial that could prevent a whisper from becoming a shout. The math of mortality rebalanced. The gift of days was given out in quiet handfuls. Penicillin did not do this alone. Earlier drugs, sulfa powders, and tablets had already begun to tip the scales. But penicillin, and then its cousins, formed a family that could walk into the body and politely yet firmly escort danger out. The factory floors where the drug was born at scale, steel towers, thin ladders, gauges that blinked like stars, looked nothing like a bedside. And yet, here was a clear line from vat to vein, from fermentation to fever, broken in the small hours of a ward night. The war ended. The tanks did not. They merely changed their schedules. What had been built to rescue soldiers began to rescue children with pneumonia, mothers with infections, strangers with unlucky cuts. The idea of medicine as a thing you could grow became ordinary, and with it, an era in which infections that had once ruled human life quietly lost their throne. We remember, too, the responsibility that came with abundance, to use wisely, to steward potency, to keep this miracle for as many nights as possible. Quiet fact. Discovered in 1928, penicillin became a practical, plentiful medicine during the war, thanks to innovations in fermentation and purification. The shift from scarcity to mass production changed battlefield survival and then civilian health around the world. Let the thought of healing lower your heartbeat. Imagine fever drifting down like snow melting in spring. Imagine breath deepening because breath can. 3. Rivets, wrenches, and anew, women rebuild the workday. Hear the echo now of vast buildings, shipyards and factories that smell of metal and hot paint, of lunches and brown paper, and the sweet sawdust of new scaffolds. The war made vacancies where hands had been. Assembly lines, docks, drafting rooms, dispatch tables. Into those spaces walked women by the thousands, hair tied back with scarves, sleeves rolled, cheeks smudged not with rouge, but with the honest charcoal of labor. "Can you do this?" someone asked, half hoping the answer was no. "Yes," they said, and then they did. Rivets kissed steel into ships. Wings stretched under the hands of mechanics who learned to trust torque wrenches the way a pianist trusts a metronome. In offices, women decoded, scheduled, balanced. On airfields, pilots ferried planes from factory to front, delivering, not dogfighting, yet always within the vocabulary of flight. In laboratories, they calculated trajectories, checked tolerances, wrote procedures, and later, in some blessed back rooms, wrote the first lines of the software that would teach machines how to think. Workplaces adapted at a pace that would have seemed impossible in peacetime. Childcare centers opened near gates where whistles blew. Cafeterias learned to stretch rations into meals that tasted like forward motion. Pay envelopes weren't always fair, but they were new, and they were proof. Posters were printed. A rolled sleeve became an emblem. The word capable climbed down from the shelf and put on boots. When the war ended, the world tried to snap back like a rubber band. Some of those women were asked to return to kitchens and boutiques to untie the scarf and pin back the desire. Many did, out of love, necessity, or lack of options, and carried the pride quietly with them into PTA meetings and night classes. Others stayed where they had made themselves at home, in labs, on shop floors, in classrooms, teaching the next hands how to hold the tools. And the memory of competence did not fade. It smoldered into the movements that would ask, in calmer years, for equity in law as well as in poster art. Think of a young girl watching her mother wash aluminum shavings from her hair in a tin basin. Think of the way that image rewrites the dictionary inside a child. Strong equals also me. Smart equals also me. Indispensable equals also me. It will take time for the message to find its echo in every corridor. But once a heart has owned its power, history must find ways to accommodate the fact. Quiet fact. Wartime labor programs brought millions of women into heavy industry, logistics, engineering support, and military auxiliary roles. After 1945, many were pushed out or diverted, but the experience seeded expectations and networks that would nourish the later waves of the women's movement. Breathe in the clean, bright scent of metal cooling. Breathe out the tired but satisfied exhale at the end of a shift. Let your shoulders rest as if you've set a heavy tool down. 4. The taste of after. How the war rearranged the table. Finally, the kitchen, always the truest archive of a household. Open the cupboard and find not just food, but history stacked in cans and jars. The war taught millions how to ration, how to stretch, how to grow something edible from a square of soil behind a row house. It taught governments to think about calories as policy, milk and bread and vitamins as logistics. It turned backyards into victory gardens, jars into quiet trophies, and recipes into codes for getting by without the ingredients the tongue still remembered like a song. In some countries, rationing lingered for years. Sugar, butter, meat were measured out not by appetite, but by books of small paper teeth. New staples learned their manners. Powdered eggs that asked for patience. Canned meat that became the surprise guest at 100 casseroles. Dried soup that needed only water and a willing pot. Instant coffee took root. Tea traveled in careful amounts. People discovered that a little fat, used thoughtfully, could taste like celebration, and that vegetables, when seasoned with imagination and time, could taste like respect for the body. Factories that once filled crates for the front learned to fill aisles for households. Tins with tidy fonts, labels that promised shelf life like a new kind of security. Packaging improved because it had to survive oceans and weather. After the war, that sturdiness came home and stayed. New plastics arrived in lunch pails and on countertops. The cold chain, refrigerated trucks, and rail quietly expanded, and with it, fresher food could travel farther. In some places, families bought their first reliable refrigerators or small freezers. The hum in the corner became part of the song of evening. There were unintended gifts, too. Rationing sometimes enforced a kind of equity. Even the wealthy had to stand in lines that leveled. Public health officials, given the rare chance to plan a nation's menu, leaned toward balance where they could. More whole grains, more leafy things, less of what had been over-easy luxuries. In at least one island nation, children's health markers, weights and teeth and stamina, quietly improved despite the hardship, because the diet, though spare, was thoughtful. It was a lesson the post-war decades remembered for a while, and then, sometimes, forgot. Not all habits were wholesome. Convenience grew appealing. Understandably, after years when time and fuel were precious, cans and boxes promised certainty. Instant mixes offered relief to hands that had been working too long at too many jobs. Later, clever marketers would build entire empires on effortless meals and snacks that ignored the seasons. Yet alongside those empires, the garden never truly died. The knowledge of how to plant a row of beans, how to bottle tomatoes still warm from the afternoon, how to make soup from bones and patience. These survived in notebooks stained with stock and in the muscle memory of grandmothers and, blessedly, grandfathers too. There were different stories in different countries. A national loaf of sturdy bread in one. Curious spreads and substitutes in another. A black market that whispered in alleyways where official rations ran thin. Immigrants carried flavors across oceans during and after the war, changing neighborhoods one spice at a time. Soldiers returned with tastes acquired far from home and asked for them at dinner tables that were willing to experiment. From hardship and travel and ingenuity, a modern palate assembled itself, part thrift, part bravado, part gratitude. Quiet fact: wartime rationing, logistics, and preservation reshaped what people ate and how they cooked. Spurring mass canning, improved packaging, expansion of cold chain transport, growth of home gardens, and even, in some places, modest improvements in nutrition due to planned, balanced rations and fortified staples. Breathe in as if a warm kitchen opened its door to you. Breathe out as if the table were already set, simple and good. Let the hunger of fear be replaced with the appetite of peace. What the long view teaches so. Machines that learned to think in order to hear what enemies were saying, and then stayed to help us write letters, navigate roads, and call each other good night. Medicines that learned to multiply until their abundance rewrote what it meant to be sick. Workplaces that opened to hands they had overlooked and could never again honestly forget. Kitchens that practiced humility and invention until new habits took root. History changes the world loudest in explosions and parades, but the changes that last are often the ones you can fit in your pocket. A vacuum tube's warm glow becoming the quiet competence of a microchip. A glass vial becoming a pharmacy shelf. A paycheck becoming an expectation. A ration book becoming a recipe you still make because your grandmother taught you, and it tastes like calm. Lie back a little deeper into your pillow. Let the arcs we traced settle into a single, generous curve. From secrets to circuits, from mold to medicine, from posters to pay, from coupons to cupboards. All these currents pull away from terror and toward life. Inhale. Feel the future enter. Gentle. Exhale. Let the past release its grip. We will carry these understandings forward, softly, into the next part of the night, where tension will reach its high tide and then ebb, and where the story will begin its descent into rest. For now, keep your breath unhurried. The machines are quiet. The factories have turned out their lights. The kitchens are clean and warm. The world, which once held its breath, remembers how to breathe again. And so do you. The night deepens. Footsteps that were once careful now quicken. Clocks that were once patient now seem to tick louder, as if urging history to choose. We are entering the narrow corridor where invention sprints, where rumor and iron and light gather speed. Keep your breath slow, even as the story climbs. In and out. We will move through thunder without letting it take your rest. The rise. Secrets, shadows, and the theater of war. First, the rooms with locked doors. In desert air so dry it seems to erase footsteps, a cluster of barracks and labs becomes a city without a street map. Chalk dust and equations. Coffee that tastes like midnight. A hush that is not silence but concentration condensed. People have left their coastal homes, their campuses, their studios, and come inland to coax the unseen into obedience. Neutrons counted like beads, metals that sulk unless shaped just so. Circuits that must say yes and no with absolute clarity. They pack their lunches in brown paper and their worries in smaller boxes still. They sign their names and then erase them. They send letters that are mostly weather. They are building a door they hope never to open. Elsewhere, the air shivers over paved runways as aircraft multiply. Engineers refine shapes until wind itself seems to welcome them. Pilots memorize checklists. Crews practice the patient art of routine because routine is the best magic against chaos. On charts, the oceans are wide and flat, but over them move convoys and escorts, signals and countersignals, a chessboard with spray. In cities, sirens rehearse. The world's pulse climbs. And then, listen, another sound enters the war. A sound designed not to be heard, but to be believed. Theater. On quiet fields and along hedgerows, men in American uniforms inflate rubber tanks until the skin of each bulges, with the certainty of steel. Artists paint shadows where weight should fall. Sound trucks throb with recorded engines. Radio operators transmit conversations between units that don't exist. Maps are shown to those who are meant to see them. Patrols find tracks that lead to air that trembles with the idea of armor. The deception is a soft, luminous lie told to save lives. A phantom army, a chorus of ghosts so convincing that it bends real armies away. The battlefield becomes a stage, and the stagecraft is careful. Illusion where destruction would have been. Art used as armor. Far to the east, the fields ripple with crops and with something heavier. Tracks pressing furrows the soil never asked for. The summer grass of the steppe leans, then kneels, under the weight of the world's largest armored clash. Engines cough black breath. The ground makes a sound like thunder reconsidering itself. It is Kursk, and in its vastness, the mind finds edges difficult. Waves of steel pushing against waves of steel. Tactics thrown and rethrown. The earth learning new dictionary entries for the word pressure. Over weeks, momentum attempts to choose a side and finds that human endurance, not merely machines, will decide. When the battle finally loosens its grip, the land remembers the patterns pressed into it, and history remembers a turning. Back in the secret city, dawn arrives, wearing a different brightness. In a valley of sage and dust, the horizon briefly becomes more than horizon. Light so sudden and complete, it redraws the idea of day. Those who witness it write about shadows with edges too sharp for morning, about a sound that arrives late but rearranges everything when it does. They blink grit from their eyes and know with a kind of quiet terror that the door they built can open. They go home to breakfast that tastes too ordinary for the news they are carrying. When that door is unlatched over a distant city, stone remembers. In Hiroshima, a stairway keeps the outline of a person who once paused there, a pale silhouette where skin and cloth became a brief shield between light and stone. It is a shadow no sun can make. It is a mark the world cannot, must not, forget. The war has always been about towns and fields and families. Now, it is also about the air itself doing something new, something permanently persuasive. The mind, careful and tired, learns that there is a kind of brightness from which we must always turn away. Hold your breath, and now let it out, gently. We acknowledge the height of the wave. We do not stay at the crest. The bend, when the noise begins to quiet, the tide of noise recedes even as the work of mending grows loud. In Europe, the war loosens its teeth first. Papers are signed. Dates take on capital letters. People climb out of basements and learn the shapes of their streets again. Windows, long dark, begin to taste light. Brooms and hammers become instruments of relief. Sweep, lift, nail, sweep. Church bells try out their voices, a little rusty, as if clearing throats before a hymn. You can hear laughter in the distance, at first cautious, then free of its own surprise. In Asia, the calendar turns and then, after the previously unthinkable, turns once more toward a stop. Radios crackle with sentences that have waited too long. Homecomings are written on ticket stubs and on the backs of envelopes, on train schedules, and on chalkboard menus that suddenly include the word celebration. The world inhales new maps and exhales old fears. Victory is a paradox with two hands. One lifts banners, the other lifts rubble. Both are honest. In one neighborhood, a brass band remembers every note and every rest. In the next, walls stand roofless, dignified as elders. Children chase each other through newly opened courtyards and discover, with the practical curiosity of childhood, how to turn broken into game. Gardens begin again in coffee tins and cracked pitchers. Laundry flaps on lines as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and because something extraordinary has, laundry means normal. And yet, the strangest, gentlest moments are the ones that do not fit parade routes. A soldier, lean and dusted, sits on a curb beside a man he had been taught to fear. Between them, a tin of something simple, sardines maybe, or a rectangle of chocolate. One offers half to the other without speech. They share a spoon, the way children share a discovery. The bigger war shrinks for a minute into the small truth that hunger is not ideological, and that kindness can hold a cup out of habit even when habit has been broken for years. In another town, a girl in a dress with a mended hem is handed a piece of gum by an unfamiliar uniform. She does not know the word allies, but she knows the word sweet and the way a smile translates in every grammar. Ships turn toward home. Trains, still smelling of coal and weather, pull into stations where families have become experts at scanning faces. On the docks, duffel bags thud like punctuation at the end of long sentences. Some reunions are clumsy because joy and grief share the same doorway and sometimes try to go through at once. People practice the new etiquette of peace. How to speak to a silence that sat in a chair while you were gone. How to hold someone without counting the seconds until you have to let go. The image that stands for a feeling. In a square filled with light and noise. Times Square, New York, cameras catch a moment that America will learn by heart. A sailor, flooded with relief and something wilder, sweeps a woman into a kiss. The photograph will live a long, complicated life, celebrated, critiqued, questioned. But in that second, it is taken as proof that a horizon exists after long nights. Flags hang like laundry in a wind that has finally remembered play. Paper snow falls from windows. Receipts and memos turned into confetti for the sake of a city learning to throw its joy. Car horns forget their purpose and become instruments. Strangers become a crowd, and the crowd becomes a single, grateful exhale. Elsewhere, the symbols are quieter. A light switched on without blackout curtains. A child allowed to sleep without shoes by the bed. A letter that does not begin with "I am safe," because safeness can be assumed for a day. Couples who wrote in pencil now write in ink. A shopkeeper sets a bowl of apples on a counter and is startled by the color. The descent. How to end a storm war ends unevenly. For some, it becomes a date on the calendar and a box of uniforms in the attic. For others, it remains an echo that visits at night. The task ahead is not to forget. Forgetting would be another loss, but to remember in a way that lets sleep come. Cities practice this by lighting candles on anniversaries and by building libraries where stories can rest between covers. Families practice by telling what happened at tables also laden with what is happening. Bread warm from the oven, hands sticky with jam. Someone fetching more chairs because there are more people now. Look again at the places we've been. The secret city learns to tell some of its truths and to keep others folded out of respect. The fields at Kursk grow wheat again, roots lacing soil that once knew treads. The ghost army deflates its tanks and packs its brushes. The artists return to studios and advertising firms and use their gifts for a quieter commerce. In Hiroshima, visitors move slowly, reading plaques and faces. There are trees that sprouted despite everything, and they are treated like teachers. And the simple exchanges, the shared rations between former enemies, continue in other forms. Aid ships carry flour where flour is scarce. Doctors train successors who speak another language. Classrooms welcome children whose parents crossed oceans because maps were rewritten. The habit of generosity survives war because it is older than war. Now let the tempo ease. We have climbed, and now we go down the other side. The radios soften. The newspapers rustle smaller. Boots become shoes again. Factories retool. Bedrooms reclaim their lampshades. Parks rediscover laughter that doesn't check the sky first. Inhale gently. Feel the burden lift by ounces, then by pounds. Exhale slowly. Feel a chair you trust beneath you. A bed that remembers your shape. Victory is not just a word pronounced into microphones. It is also the permission to rest, to set the heavy tool down, to wash the ink from your hands, to make tea without listening for sirens between the kettle's song and the cup. Hold for a moment the paradox that is honest, freedom and ruins, relief and remembrance. Keep both. They balance each other respectfully, like two palms meeting. In that balance, the night begins its gentle slope toward peace. The wave has broken. The foam hisses into sand. What remains is the long, even draw of the tide, the sound that teaches hearts how to slow. We will follow it into the quiet. The night has walked a long road with us. We've heard engines and violins, watched shadows turn to lessons, felt letters soften a winter. Now we set the heavy book down and keep only a page, the one that helps the mind grow quiet. I am your night guide, and before you sleep, I'll place a simple truth in your open hand. All wars leave scars, but even in darkness, stories of goodness and mercy are born. Let that sentence spread like warmth from your palm to your wrist, from your wrist to your shoulder, to the slow, steady chamber of the heart. Scars are the body's way of remembering and also of healing. History, too, heals not by pretending nothing happened, but by growing new skin over what did. It remains tender. It remains true. Yet in the tender places, light finds entrances. Think of the small mercies we carried through the story. A blanket shared on a platform deep under London. A secret poem whispered in a kitchen where the stove ticked like a friendly clock. A watchmaker aligning a spring so that time could be trusted. A melody that found courage in a barracks and refused to vanish. A soldier offering a ration tin to the person who, 1 week earlier, was his enemy. None of these erased the war. None of these were loud. And yet, when you add them together, they become a tide that pulls the world toward morning. Breathe with me now in unhurried measures. Inhale through the nose. Count 1, 2, 3. Hold gently. 1. Exhale through the mouth. 2, 3, 4. Again, softer. The body loves patterns that are kind. A quiet philosophy. We live with contradictions because we are human. We can hold gratitude and grief at the same time without dropping either. The mind wants clean edges, but life gives us shorelines, wet and changing, honest in their curves. The war gave the world new machines, new medicines, new maps. It also gave us absences that will never be filled. To be wise is not to choose one truth and discard the other. It is to sit with both and let them teach us how to walk. Look at how goodness worked in secret, like roots, underground gardens and nights without stars. Letters that traveled as tiny photographs, so encouragement could arrive big. Code breakers who took apart the world's hardest knots, and then, almost shyly, handed us the first tools to speak across oceans of silence. Each was a craft of patience. Each said, "We are capable of gentleness, even while the world is not." And if part of you wonders whether small things matter, consider sleep itself. Sleep is a small thing, yet it restores everything that can be restored. No law is passed during sleep. No parade is held. No photograph is taken. The body simply repairs, remembers, releases. The small does its quiet work, and the morning is different because it did. A thread from then to now. Tonight, as you fall asleep in quiet, remember, quiet is a luxury millions once fought for. Listen, really listen to your room. Perhaps you hear the mild breath of an air vent, a refrigerator far away in the kitchen, a neighbor's door closing like a sentence with a soft period. Perhaps there is a train in the distance, a low punctuation against the dark. Perhaps there is only your own breathing, a tide obedient to the moon of your heartbeat. This quiet is not an accident. It is built out of courage, out of repair, out of the stubborn human talent for making safe places and then widening them. If a siren passes tonight, it is likely not for you. If the lights in your window glow, it is because no curtain needs to hide them. If your phone rests in your hand, it is a descendant of those early machines that learned to think so that people could come home sooner, safer. If you take an antibiotic when you are ill, it is because someone once stared into a fermenter and thought, we can make enough to share. If your work gives you dignity, it is linked, however distantly, to a rolled sleeve and a paycheck that proved a country's daughters could build ships and planes and futures. If your pantry holds simple, steady food, know that ration books and gardens taught us how to feed both bodies and hope. This is the thread between nights, the ordinary, blessed absence of fear. It is not guaranteed. It needs tending. But tonight it is here, and you are entitled to enjoy it without guilt. Gratitude is a form of maintenance. Take a moment then to be simply, quietly grateful. Inhale and think, safe. Exhale and think, home. Setting the story, down. The people we met are going to their beds now, in whatever century belongs to them. The pilot with the peppermint chip feels the ground under his boots and the promise of an unremarkable tomorrow. The teacher places the poem back into the flower jar and smiles at the thought of chalk dust on small hands. On a Pacific island, a man who kept his post for too long finally sleeps under a roof that does not leak, with a city murmuring kindness outside his window. A boy in Ohio slides a letter under his pillow, not to guard it, but to be near the feeling that words can travel further than worry. In London, the tiled walls of a platform hold the day's warmth a little longer than physics says they should. In Paris, a mirror catches a woman's new curl and returns to her a face that belongs only to itself. In Switzerland, a bench lamp clicks off. A balanced spring rests. The watch on the sill keeps time for a sleeping house. In the hardest places, the violin goes into its rag again, wrapped like bread for the next morning's hunger. Everything becomes softer. Everything becomes slower. And somewhere in New York, a photograph sails down a dark river of avenues and settles into an album, then a museum, then a memory. Its kiss remains complicated because life is complicated. Yet to generations who come later, it keeps saying, there is a day after the last day. There is a crowd after the loneliness. There is a reason to look up. A poem made of simple things. Let me leave you with a small poem, not in rhyme, but in cadence, the rhythm that sleep understands. Night is a quilt. Stars are the careful stitches. Your breath is the thread that holds the pieces together. Here is the letter we carried, folded twice. Here is the watch that ticks without hurry. Here is the platform where strangers became neighbors for a while. Here is the garden that hands remembered how to plant. Here is the bough, lifted, and the single note that says, we are still here. You do not have to carry all of history into your dreams. Set it on the table by the bed. It will wait. It will be there in the morning, calmer for having rested. A benediction for sleep. May your room learn the grammar of silence. May your windows be the eyes of a house that is not afraid to look at the moon. May your scars, whatever their origin, be acknowledged and also soothed. May you find, inside the day you just lived, 3 small mercies, and may those 3 be enough to light the path to morning. Inhale, slow, smooth. Count to 3. Hold, 1. Exhale, longer than the inhale. Count to 4, again and again, but softer. If thoughts arrive, greet them like travelers at a station and point them toward their next train. If worry taps your shoulder, give it a blanket and tell it there will be time tomorrow. If memory shows you a difficult picture, turn down the lamp. Your mind can look again in daylight, with help at your side. The past has taught us the cost of noise. The present invites us to practice quiet as a daily art, and the future, despite our doubts, waits with fields that will be sown, with doorways that will be painted, with books that will be exactly heavy enough to make us grateful for pillows. Now we close the cover. Now we dim the last light. Now we keep only what eases the breath. The promise that goodness persists, that mercy multiplies, that dawn is a loyal traveler, even when the tracks are long. Sleep then. Sleep safely and without hurry. The world will take the night watch. And when morning comes, it will. You will wake to a day already leaning toward peace. We are at the softest part of night. The story loosens its grip. Only quiet remains. Let each breath be simple. Let each thought arrive late and leave early. Silence, night, peace. Again, slower. Silence, night, peace. Inhale through the nose for 4. Hold for 2. Exhale through the mouth for 6. Pause. Let the breath find you. Now a gentle scan, as if moonlight were passing over a calm lake. Forehead soft, eyes heavy and kind, jaw unclenched, tongue resting like a small boat on quiet water, shoulders gently lower as if setting down a coat, arms warm and weighty, hands loose, palms open to rest, chest easy, rising, falling, like a tide that knows the shore. Belly released, hips grounded, legs long and quiet, ankles easy, feet peaceful, toes uncurled. Silence, night, peace. Breathe again. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Each cycle slower. Each exhale a longer ribbon. Picture a wide, dark sky. Stars are steady pins of light. You are lying at the water's edge of a still lake. The air is cool and kind. Every ripple is a thought finishing its small journey to shore and smoothing into glass. Nothing asks for you now. Nothing urgent, nothing sharp. Only rest. If a thought taps your shoulder, you can nod and let it pass. If memory wanders in, give it a blanket and say, tomorrow. If the mind reaches for handles and headlines, offer it a simpler word, quiet. Or this one, home. Or the softly repeated trio, silence, night, peace. Your breath becomes the metronome of comfort. Inhale a little cool. Exhale a little warm. Pull in ease. Let go of effort. Pull in safety. Let go of noise. Pull in the hush of distant fields and sleeping streets. Let go of the day. Now count 3 drowsy breaths with me. 1. Inhale 4. Hold 2. Exhale 6. 2. Shoulders soften another shade. The mattress remembers your shape. 3. The body learns the lesson of the pillow and keeps it. The room has its own heartbeat, very slow. The window is a friendly square of dark. Somewhere far away, a train hums like a lullaby you barely recall. You don't have to follow it. You only have to float. If you wish, place one hand on your heart, one on your belly. Feel the upper hand rise a little, the lower hand rise a lot. Let the body choose the tempo. You only listen. Silence. Night. Peace. Inhale. Exhale. Calm. Again. Softer. Inhale. Exhale. Calm. Now a blessing. Simple and clear, like water. May your sleep be peaceful and your morning be bright. May your dreams be gentle. May your breath stay steady. May the quiet keep watch at your door. There's nothing else to do. Nothing else to fix. Nothing else to remember. Only this. Silence. Night. Peace. Inhale. Exhale. Calm.